Let's talk about the carbon budget. How much more CO2 can humans continue to emit into the atmosphere to stay below certain temperatures? As we mentioned, over the last 100 years, humans have emitted about over 2,000 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. How much is left that we can emit of carbon to stay below certain temperatures? And that's that amount of carbon we can continue to emit. It's called the carbon budget. So how much left is in the carbon budget? If we want to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius, there's only 420 gigatons of carbon left in the carbon budget. At 59 gigatons emissions a year globally, we only have about 7 years so that we can emit that amount to keep temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Only 7 years. We have to immediately, drastically cut the amount of carbon emissions. What we're doing collectively in the world and individually as Western nations is inadequate. To keep temperatures from rising above 2 degrees Celsius, collectively, global emissions must decline by 25% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. To keep it below 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. So who are the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? The biggest emitters we mentioned, number 1 is China, number 2 is the United States, number 3 is the European Union, including the United Kingdom, and in the next place is India. The 4 entities, United States, China, the EU, and India, contribute 55% of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. 4 countries, 55%. The G20 members of the world, Western industrialized wealthy countries, those 20 members contribute 78% of greenhouse gas emissions. Developing countries, who are much poorer, have a lag in the adoption of low-emission technologies. They wish to get in line because these developing countries are building electric generating plants. They're building industry which doesn't really conform to the needs set out in Paris to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to convert to renewable systems and green energy. They're not doing that because they don't have the technology and they don't have the money. And they're asking the global north, the wealthiest countries, to help them with money and technology transfer to do that. The biggest growth today in greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the developed world, developing countries who are trying to get their economies up to speed, as we have done over the last 100 years. If we don't get our greenhouse gas emissions sharply reduced, what are we facing? Very sharp increases in temperature. We've seen the heat waves in the U.S. and globally, continued severe droughts, floods, reduced food production, maize, wheat, rice, and other cereals, reduce livestock that depends on those crops. And we have a world population of 8 billion, which could increase to 10 billion by the end of the century. And we're facing a very sharp reduction in production of food crops because of climate change. Farming is not nearly as productive with all these droughts and floods. A large portion of the world also relies on its protein sources from the oceans. And as the ocean temperatures increase, and they absorb temperature from human activities, and the carbon levels increase, the oceans absorb both heat as well as carbon. As those increase, the oceans are less productive. We also endanger natural areas of the earth that we rely on: forests, wetlands, rivers, underground freshwater aquifers that humans rely on for essential life-giving elements: oxygen, clean fresh water. These natural systems help moderate the climate, as we mentioned, especially forests throughout the world. Not only the tropical forests, but the boreal forests in northern latitudes. They absorb carbon and they emit oxygen. So we want to avoid what climate scientists call as dangerous tipping points, increases in temperature, where natural systems keep the Earth in balance, such as forests, large ice masses, Antarctica and Greenland, because they reflect heat back into space. And if they are affected sufficiently, instead of helping the Earth maintain its healthy climate, they become sources of increased warming because they don't reflect, for example, the ice sheets, enough heat into the atmosphere out so they shrink. So the world is moving towards renewable electric generation, but by the year 2050, we have to have a 75% dependence on electricity from renewable sources. The United States in 2019, the electricity we produced was 18% renewables, which includes hydroelectric, dams on rivers, solar, and wind. So we must increase that sharply. What's interesting is that renewable energy sources, especially photoelectric, solar, and wind, are much cheaper today. The technology has increased so well, and the costs have come down so much that it costs a fraction of the amount to produce a kilowatt of electricity with renewables, wind and solar, as compared to fossil fuel electric generation, coal and natural gas. Now, over the last 20 or 30 years ago, most of the electricity produced in the United States was from coal-burning electric generating systems. The coal is the filthiest of all the fossil fuels. So a lot of the electric companies converted coal generating plants to plants that relied on natural gas for their fuel. And you hear natural gas is safe, natural gas is green, natural gas is a transition to renewable. None of that's true. Natural gas is a fossil fuel. Natural gas is 85% methane, and it's a very dangerous fossil fuel. When burned, natural gas produces about half the amount of carbon as coal. That's good, but it's still emitting huge amounts of carbon in the atmosphere, 50% at the level of coal. The other big concern about natural gas is in its unburned state. If natural gas escapes into the atmosphere before it's burned, leaking from tanks, leaking from storage, leaking from pipes that move natural gas, and also when we drill for oil and gas, natural gas escapes into the atmosphere. So it's escaping unburned. Unburned, it's much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. Climate scientists tell us it's 50 to 80 times more potent a greenhouse gas, but in a short period of time, between 20 and 100 years, but much more powerful. In order to get us in line with the promises made in Paris and to reduce global warming, natural gas is a big issue, and we must transition away from that. The problem is when a electric generating company, a utility, decides to convert a coal-burning electric generating facility to natural gas, they've made certain changes, technological changes, they've made an investment, and they're stuck with that for 20 or 30 years. So they're going to be burning natural gas for 20 or 30 more years, a fossil fuel. Instead, they should have converted to solar or wind. We also have to move our transportation much more towards low emissions, and we'd have to have 65% electric vehicles by the year 2050. A lot of the car manufacturing plants have announced, such as GM, they're going to have its entire fleet of cars and SUVs and trucks electric by 2035. Ford, Volkswagen, and the other big automakers have announced similar plans to do that. So people have asked, well, what can I do as an individual? I'm just one person. Isn't it the countries of the world? Isn't it the industries of the world that are causing global warming? If you look at emissions from the standpoint of consumption, 2/3 of emissions are linked to private households. Companies produce electricity in dirty or clean renewable methods. We consume that. Homes are built. Do they have good insulation? Do they have appliances which are electric instead of gas? So as individuals, there's much we can do to demand that the earth move quickly to renewable resources. Do we have the best insulation, efficient lighting in our houses and places of work? What is our food consumption? We know that a non-meat diet, relying on vegetable proteins, is much healthier for the planet than meat. And the reason is that not only does an ounce of meat use thousands of gallons of water compared to plant, but we also know that the production of beef cattle is the greatest cause of deforestation of the Amazon rainforests because they're cutting down vast areas of the forest to create pasture land for cattle. We can also individually use less air travel. International transportation, planes, ships, are 5% of all annual global greenhouse gas emissions. Taking vacations closer to home is a key to that. The richest 1% of the world's population accounts for 2 times as much greenhouse gases as the poorest 50%. The Biden administration in 2022 passed a law called the Inflation Reduction Act. A large part of that was more friendly environmental policies moving towards green energy. It's a $370 billion program, the most ambitious environmental program in the history of the world, to move the United States towards renewable energy, producing batteries, requiring that a certain amount of electric vehicles sold in the United States by 2032 are electric, require the elimination of 90% of coal plants by the year 2039 or shut them down, requiring oil companies to plug methane leaks, which is the natural gas that we talked about, and many other initiatives. Millions and millions of dollars are being spent in many states today to produce the products that are necessary to transition to renewables, whether it's batteries, electric vehicles, and other technological advances. And there's thousands of people that are being employed in those states. Many of them are Republican states. It's ironic that every Republican voted against the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, and yet they benefit tremendously. I think Ohio has $500 million invested in green energy production and factories, though the representatives from Ohio voted against the act. The Inflation Reduction Act also promises environmental justice initiatives. Who lives in frontline communities where they are the most subject to floods, to the dangers of living near electric power plants? Who are the most vulnerable to heat, droughts? So there's much being done by the Inflation Reduction Act. We are on the way. We're not quite doing it much, but we're moving very quickly in the right direction. And we hope that continues, and other countries in the world also increase their promises and fulfill their promises to drastically reduce greenhouse gases. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Climate Guru Brent, signing out. Thanks for tuning in to the Climate Guru podcast. Stay inspired, stay informed, and keep taking action for our planet's future. Until next time, and remember, together we can make a difference.